All right. I think we're in business, Clay. Um, I guess no formal introductions are needed. This is hopefully a recurring thing that we're gonna try to at least experiment with, maybe bi-weekly or at least once a month, get together, talk about all the things, real estate investing and things that are going on just overall, maybe work-wise, family-wise, things like that. Our first episode, I'll send you some stats. It was pretty interesting, very popular. Lots of great feedback, lots of little nuggets that came out of that. So I thought that we would continue these talks, these dialogues, at least from our personal perspective. Kind of, here's some of the things that I'm looking at. Here's some of the things that I'm going to invest in. Here's some of the things that I'm going to avoid, and looking to get your feedback as well from your standpoint, because you're in a completely different market, completely different strategies and things like that. So at least from the audience perspective, it gives kind of that diverse point of view into things.
Sounds perfect, John.
It's great. So maybe what I could share first is at least a few deals that I'm in right now. That I've got on the contract beginning of December, and things have changed. Since then, I'm still in those deals. I'm still looking to close by mid to end of January. But I wanted to kind of just share some of those two deals with you. Maybe you can give me some feedback with just some of the immediate thoughts, and then I have some data that I wanted to present as well that kind of backs some of that investment thesis that I was executing at the time.
Yeah, I'm curious what changed over the last couple weeks. It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So majority of stuff that really changed, that it wasn't necessarily me rethinking those deals, but it's the fluctuation in rates. On one of the deals, I was able to lock in the rate for 30 days, so that's not a problem at all. On one of them, I actually kind of let that float, and it's been a roller coaster. It's been very interesting. The rates have gone down, sometime mid to end December, and these first few days of January, we're seeing just some not such a pretty picture when it comes to the at least the conventional loan rates. Um, so the
So what did
first
it
deal,
what did it move from?
it wasn't anything ridiculous. We're still in kind of that sub seven range, but the reason for some of the fluctuation is because on both of those deals, one is a single family luxury property, single family residential, and the other one is a mid tier townhouse. Um, and I'll explain my reasoning for why they fit into my investment thesis. But overall, the financing structure for both of those were on a 5-1 arm or a 7-1 arm. And the reason I went with those programs is because of my thesis that I can refinance, hopefully by Q4, or maybe Q1 of next year. At least that's my prognosis, that the rates will at least start stabilizing, going down a little bit more. And the 5-1 7-1 arm really allows me at least to lock in that particular rate, even though it's higher for that 5 year or the 7 year period. And then, hopefully I don't get to that point where I'm still sitting on that higher rate that's between 6 and 7, beyond those 5 or 7 years to wait for that refinance. So those are the two programs that I chose. They gave me the best rates, that really kind of fit the financial model that I was running when it comes to just renting those out, and just at least the on one of them to break even from the concept of just the overall taxes, insurance, and getting everything into the model.
So breaking even from a cash flow standpoint, a lot of people would look at that and say, "Well, why are you doing that?" Like,
Yeah,
don't you want to? Don't isn't this thing about making income and making passive income? So,
one hundred
what's the
percent.
reason why you're okay with a neutral cash flow?
Yeah, so this was based on my data that I've gathered for the past several years on the South Florida market when it comes to the luxury real estate, single family residential properties. That this was the highest performing class when it comes to appreciation for the past several years, and essentially that's the type of property that in my investment thesis fits into the long term kind of the hold model, that this is not a flip, this is not something that I'm looking to offload anytime soon. Is just something that I want to hold on to and weather essentially this storm of high interest rates. I've put a little bit more aggressive down payment just so that I could still fit into the model of being able to rent it out. But essentially, if I'm breaking even and there's not a lot of work involved, at least on the annual rent perspective, that I'm able to take advantage of a lot of other benefits, such as the depreciation, the tax advantages from that perspective, and be able to write off a lot of things. And from that standpoint, that's checks that check mark on kind of that win column, um,
And
for that particular tenant.
a lot of people with these luxury single families, they're gonna Airbnb it. Is that your plan?
Well, it's definitely a longer term plan, and that's good portion of my investment thesis is focusing on the luxury real estate. Luxury I define as at least $1 million and up, with it's a single family residential property east of 95, as we call it here in South Florida. Something that's on the coast, something that's very close to the beach, something that's very close to the three areas that I invest in, close to downtown and the top schools. So that's in my book, that's my definition of the luxury real estate category that I'm investing in, for exact same reason what you just mentioned, that regardless of the condition of the market, that people that can afford luxury real estate, luxury rentals, they will still travel. They will still, you know, the pinch from the recession or whatever the case we're experiencing with the inflation is not going to be so detrimental to their bottom line, to their financial situation. That my theory is that they will still travel regardless. They typically travel as a family, renting out, 2 to 3 rooms or entire suite in a hotel is not the most convenient, and Airbnb or shorter term rental becomes a very attractive option. So that's kind of at least my view into why I really like that asset class from a luxury real estate perspective. And also, just to add a little bit more, the type of people that you deal with, yes, it's a little bit more of a hand holding when it comes to property management. There's different demands, different approach, and all of that stuff. We can talk about that. But just the caliber of folks that you're dealing with, and just them understanding what this is all about, to me that makes a lot more sense versus just something that's a lot of churn and burn, with the folks that are just probably a lot more demanding from little nitty gritty type stuff.
Yeah, it's certainly recession proof, and I've got some stuff in the portfolio that I've a big part of the reason I have it is because it is recession proof. Um, it's on the complete opposite end of luxury, but yeah, I think that that's a great thesis to have, and you're right. The demand, while it lessens, it does not lessen as much as some of the other areas would. So what ended up? So what do you think is going to end up happening with that deal? Then is that the one that's going to fall through, or not? It may not fall through, but going to be affected.
No, well, both are going through. So the single family luxury real estate, the property, it's a great rate that I was able to lock in, which I'm happy that I did. At least comparing to April, May, still seemed like crazy high. It's
Yeah.
it's like 5.7 something, but for the current market condition, when I heard that number, I was like, this is insane. Let me lock it in.
Yeah.
On the other property, the vision there, it's a 2 bedroom townhouse, and there is no HOA, there's no association, which was very weird, very rare, at least for the South Florida market. That there's no governing board. It's a complex of 4 townhomes.
God, that helps a lot with cash flow, though.
Big time. And it just provides me with all different options. That essentially whatever you want to do, you can do it. You can do it. Short-term
Yeah,
rentals,
that's
mid-term
a good
rentals.
point. Yeah, you got complete flexibility. You don't have to go get approval from someone.
And that's one asset class that I stay out of. The condominiums and anything that's governed by the homeowners association is just too much risk and too much you living in the hands of somebody else to make the determination. But we came across that townhouse, and in an area that's very close to one of the major hospitals here in South Florida. So one category of renter that I'm really targeting as part of my marketing strategy are the travel nurses. So the furnishedfinder.com and all of these types of platform, I'm gonna go aggressive for advertising there, and I'm kind of designing the overall property with that in mind. And short-term rental, obviously, that's still the case because it's close to the port where all the cruise lines, the tourists that go from there, and then a newer Whole Foods store went up just a couple of blocks from that area. It's still very up and coming, but I'm just relying on kind of the Whole Foods analysis that there is something there. So these three variables really kind of just pointing me in the direction that this is a great deal, and anything less than 500,000 here in South Florida just doesn't exist. Um, so that was just super attractive, and just went aggressive and was able to get it under contract.
Yeah, and I like the play around allowing a multi-billion dollar company to do their analysis, and then you get to piggyback off that analysis. Because you're right, if Whole Foods is going there, I mean, sure, they're not going to bat 1,000, but they're going to do a lot of homework and a lot more homework than you or I could from our little offices. So yeah, piggybacking off of that and recognizing that there's probably a higher percentage chance of appreciation at a place like that than maybe somewhere more established. It sounds like a pretty good investment from my limited view here.
Hopefully, we'll see about that. We'll do.
Hey, and by the way, the traveling nurse thing, there's a lot of people talking about that now, and I think that that's a really interesting place to be because you get people for 3 months, 6 months, sometimes 12 months, sometimes longer. And I've also heard about investors going to the hospitals or trying to get up with someone at the hospital to kind of be the preferred, housing for them. So that could be an avenue that if anyone's thinking about that, and included, to go and try and do a little cold calling over there.
Yeah, that's a interesting play here. That I'm pretty sure that the hospitals, or at least the system that that's responsible for the housing of the travel nurses, of the whatever the physicians, has some type of relationships with at least the local community that provides the housing. So I would imagine that could be an interesting play. That's something that I definitely did not think about, but it seems like it's worth a shot.
Yeah, never know.
Um, so kind of few data points that I just wanted to talk about that kind of really stood out from just overall performance in 2022, and some of the indicators that I'm paying attention to when it comes to what at least what am I forecasting for my own kind of investment thesis. So let me just talk briefly through some of those, and just feel free to stop me at any one of those if you want to dive a little bit deeper into that. So, as we would expect, just overall existing home sales down about 16 and 17%. Just overall from the last year or even early part of 2022, which doesn't seem like a crazy number. But if I look at the data, 2010, 2008 has been like the lowest when it comes to the inventory of home sales, which were around like 4.2, 4 million, just a little bit around 4 million. 2021 has been pretty crazy. So those numbers, in home sales, they've been a little over 6 million homes sold. And 2022, as of this looks like mid-December, is just a little bit over 5 million homes that have been sold in 2022.
That's
Um,
interesting, and I'm sure that I think it would be hard to get this type of data, but I bet there's way more investors in single family homes today than there were
mhm.
back in 2008. So I'd be very curious how the percentage has changed, and how much of that is investors coming in and buying homes versus, you know, uh, your normal Joe and Jane going in and buying a new home.
Mhm. Yeah, that for sure. That for sure. I'm checking to see if I have any of those data points from that standpoint. But um, as far as like in 2022, there's data on characteristics of like average home buyer and the types of homes that have been sold and bought, which See, it seems relatively straightforward. Overall, first-time home buyers in 2022 actually was up 26% as compared to 34% the year before. Average age mid 30s, married couples, stuff like that. Blah blah blah. More 88% are white Caucasian. The rest of the percentages are just ridiculously low
Hmm.
when it comes to racial groups. Um, Characteristics of homes purchased, and by the way, a lot of the data that I'm looking at is from NAR, the National Association of Realtors, MLS, and Mortgage Bankers Association. Um, as far as the types of homes that have been bought in 2022, 12% of buyers purchased a brand new home, and 88% of buyers have purchased a kind of at least a previously owned home. So 12% represent a new construction, new homes built. Um, the detached single family, obvious that's an obvious category that continue to dominate about 79%, and the rest falls under kind of that 8% of whatever other categories are.
Sure. One interesting thing while you're looking at that data, one interesting thing that I found was that back in July, so June was basically peak. June of 22 was basically peak, and then interest rates started increasing, and stuff started to to stall a little bit. That July of 22 was the first decline in home prices, in home price growth. So it was the first time in 10 years that
Hmm.
that had happened. So we had had just steady home price growth for 10 years. And then July of 22, it finally dipped a little bit, and it's been dipping a little bit since. And so it's interesting because going into 23, even if that plateaus, you're still seeing lower home prices than there were a year ago. And it seems like that trend is continuing, and which is, it's basically what the Fed wanted, right? Is they wanted to slow this down a little bit and try to curb inflation. And from a home standpoint and from a real estate standpoint, it seems to have had at least a small effect.
Mhm. Which makes sense because I'm looking at the mortgage rate performance on the forecast, and Q1, well, 2021 was the lowest, but Q2, Q3 is when the rates started going up substantially, which also I think explains what you're talking about. The slowdown on just the overall market perspective, and then the forecast from the NAR and the NBA from the mortgage rate perspective, they're saying that it's gonna stay relatively stagnant throughout, at least the first 3 quarters, with Q1 being the highest rates, fluctuating between 6.5 and almost 8, um, but stabilizing at Q3 and forecasting with some slowdown, with those rates going down in Q4. So it's still in the red the first 3 quarters of 2023, and then hopefully seeing some type of stabilization towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back, just thinking about prime rates, so today's prime rate is 7.5%. If you go back to the 90s, the lowest in the 90s, I think, was around 6%. Maybe it got dipped into the five. I think it's around 6% was the lowest that it ever got in the 90s. And then it finally jumped back up. I think early recession, because we were trying to get ourselves out of a recession at the time, so it was around 3.25. Um, but I mean, it stayed pretty low, or pretty high, excuse me, for all the 90s, most of the 2000s. And then, just for a data point, 2018, it was 5.5%. Today we're at 7.5. And, got down to 3.25 for a while. And, now we've quickly gone up back to 7.5. And that's, one of the fastest increases in such a short amount of time, but it's obviously had an effect on home buying, no doubt about it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's an interesting observation, especially from the historical standpoint. Um, definitely, we've been spoiled, I guess.
Oh man, we've
But
been crazy spoiled. I mean, 7.5%. If you look historically, I don't know the exact average, but it's probably right around average. It may even be low.
Mhm.
And but of course, as you said earlier, when you were thinking you're looking at the arm rate and you got in the fives, under 6%, and you're thinking, gosh, if I had gotten this in April, it would have been in the twos probably. So going from 2%, 2.5% to 6% is obviously a massive jump and changes cash flow calculations and what you can afford and all of that. But historically, you'd be jumping for joy getting 6%.
Mhm. Well, yeah, that's a completely different perspective versus what we have been seeing.
We've been
Uh,
spoiled.
mm. Yeah, nobody wants to hear that. So there's a slide that I'll pull up, and it's kind of like a summary of just overall is the housing crash coming, or what's really the consensus of what's next. And I like how they broke down different variables that really play into at least what caused the last housing crash, which was I think like 2000, whatever, 2008, 2009, around that time, versus the current housing cycle. So the NAR and the NBA and other authorities, they've kind of compiled that data, and the first variable that they looked at is the overall job cuts. Um, from the last housing cycle perspective, they were, you know, it says 8 million jobs were cut during that period of time. Obviously, they haven't taken into account the current job cuts, especially in the past few months that we've been hearing, like the all of the tech giants and all of that. But their comparison is that just overall jobs have been significantly higher in the last housing cycle crash that we've experienced.
So there were a lot more jobs cut 10 years ago or whatever 13 years ago than there were
Mhm.
now.
Seems that way, but it's a little bit misleading because they're saying current housing cycle job cuts are relatively non-existent compared to the last cycle, which I don't know how accurate that is because of everything we've
Yeah, I'm
seen
sure
lately.
there's a lag in that data, right?
Mhm.
On the unemployment and everything, but it's probably directionally correct would be my guess.
Mhm.
And yeah, that provides stability, right? So then you don't have people defaulting on their mortgages because they don't have income anymore, and you have a much lower percentage that's going to impact. So when you have stability, that's um, maybe less investment from people, but a lot less, fire sale. We got to default on our mortgage, foreclose, um, trying to quick sale. So you're going to have that stability. I think is key because we had a lot of instability back
Mhm.
in '07, '08, '09.
Yeah, no doubt. So there's a lot of other variables that are all around, just employment, unemployment, the types of jobs and all that. I'm not going to get into those. What's interesting is on the financing side, there's a category of subprime loans. So the subprime loans, anything, if folks that are not familiar with that, is just I guess loans that have been extended to folks that don't necessarily qualify
Right.
with
Lower
high.
credit. Yeah.
Exactly. Low credit, higher interest, very, just interest only types of base loans,
Yeah. They're
um,
higher risk loans.
extremely high risk. So the category of the last housing cycle that it has been actually prevalent category of financing on subprime loans, hence the reason for a lot of just the housing crash. And then the current housing cycle, it's virtually none that these
The
loans
banks
don't
learned
even.
their lesson.
hopefully hopefully that's the case. So that's promising. So I like that from a standpoint of that's at least not going to impact from just a lot of defaults. And they dive a little bit further on a mortgage delinquency. So a lot of the subprime loans, obviously, they've been extended, to folks that don't necessarily qualify, which led to a lot of delinquencies, foreclosures, short sales, and all of that stuff. So mortgage delinquency was at 10.1% in the last housing cycle, 2008, 2009ish, and the current housing cycle mortgage delinquency is at 3.6%. So a lot less than what has been historically, at least in the last housing crash, which is promising.
So it sounds like we've learned our lessons from that standpoint. Now, there's always uh, things that happen that we don't foresee. What is that called? Black swan.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could have easily have a black swan event, no doubt about it. But we've seen the previous black swan, and we've, it sounds like, done a lot of good things to curb a lot of the issues that happened in the past.
Mhm, mhm. No doubt. And furthermore, we talk about homes in foreclosure. So last housing cycle, 2008 to 2009, homes in foreclosure were at 4.6%. Um, and the current housing cycle, it's 0.6%.
Mm.
So that's an interesting and very promising positive statistic for
Yeah, a
us to
lot of
pay attention
stability.
to.
A lot of
Yeah,
stability. That's good.
yeah,
Although
yeah. I like that.
some investors want a lot of investors want instability.
True.
As bad as that is for the broader human beings, it is for, if you are just a ruthless investor, then you probably want a lot of instability, because foreclosures mean deals, and it means that you can go further with your money. So I'm sure there's some people thinking that they want a little bit more instability.
Mhm. Yep, yep. And the last kind of two things I want to point out based on some of the research that I'm presenting here are the forecasted markets, at least in the US, that are projected to at least outperform the projections or the current market conditions. So very interesting markets. Remind us where in North Carolina you're in.
I'm in Raleigh, which is, according to a lot of stats, it's in the top 5 in terms of growth and, expected growth going into the next few
Well,
years.
not top five. You're top two. So Raleigh is at number two.
Who's number
And
one?
so
Nashville?
Rally's number two when it
Seattle?
comes to being top 10 market to outperform in
Mm,
2023. So if you guys are looking to invest in all that, talk to Clay. He's actually right there.
that's right.
Go see him. He'll help you out. So what were your other guesses for number one?
I'm guessing Seattle or Denver or Nashville.
Seattle, Denver, and Nashville. So
Oh
none
boy,
of those
John's
in
going way
top.
down the list.
So those are not anywhere near in top 10. all,
Oh
all of
man.
those that you forecasted. So closer to you, Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Marietta, Georgia,
Mm,
that whole region is projected to be the top kind of market to outperform in 2023. Looking at the historical appreciation, home sales, home inventory, all of that great stuff, that's how they came up with that ranking for number one and now number two. Um, Very interesting. That
hmm.
I would not have guessed the kind of the Georgia region to the number one. North Carolina for sure. Raleigh is very it's expected. I think you guys have been very stable. You guys have you didn't go crazy overboard like Austin, Salt Lake, and South Florida.
Yeah, it's been relatively, we've been named, I don't know, top place to live, one of the top places to live for the last 5 years. So it's just more and more people are coming every day. Um, we're about to have way too much traffic, probably. We've got to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's been pretty steady. It hasn't been explosive, but yeah, a lot of people coming. A lot of tech is coming. I mean, I equate it to Austin of 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tech is coming this way, and so like Austin, will eventually have a bunch of traffic.
Mm, that's great. So I'll just talk a little bit further about the other top 10. Unfortunately, no South Florida in the top 10,
Oh man.
but the North Florida, Jacksonville, is number 8. So that's been kind of the
You
surprising
know that
area.
Jacksonville is the largest city by square mileage in the country?
I've heard something to that extent, like landmass or whatever
Yeah,
the territory. It's interesting.
yeah.
That's a great statistic. The South Carolinas dominate the middle section with like 5 and 6.
What, Charleston?
Uh, Charleston and Greenville,
Oh
Anderson,
man,
Malden.
Greenville. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, those are the my South Carolina people aren't going to like me, but those are the only two places in South Carolina I'd want to live.
You wouldn't.
I would. Those are the
You
only
would.
two. Those are the only two places in South Carolina I'd want to live. Charleston's on the
Really
coast, beautiful. I mean, it's incredible. And then Greenville is like this little oasis on the western side of the state. Lot of tech coming there, and they got a really cool downtown. So that's a really cool spot.
interesting. Wow, I've been to Charleston, but it's beautiful city. Seemed like a lot of old money there.
There is a lot of old money, but they're starting to expand. I mean, just like everywhere, but all the neighboring communities and areas are starting to get that similar Charleston feel, and then also have their own little culture environment, kind of vibe.
Mhm.
So it's a really neat area. So I'm not surprised to hear it's on the list.
I like that. I'll let you guess the number three, and we can move on from this slide.
Number three. Okay, so we got some random ones. Um, I will say,
Think,
is there someone on the southeast?
don't think coasts. Um,
Somewhere in
think
Arizona was another thought.
close to that, yeah. So Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas
Hmm,
area, kind of that's they're ranking that as number three to outperform 2023 based on what they've seen.
interesting.
This all of this research they compare a lot that to Austin and Salt Lake, which have
Hmm,
seen like the craziest increases and the most price declines in the past several months.
hmm. Yep, I could see that. Interesting, man. Well, I feel lucky to have been raised in Raleigh and stayed here, because if it's on the list, that seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
Complete luck.
Yes, number two. Number two. That's so with that said, with Rally being number two, top 10 markets to outperform in 2023, maybe can you shed some light on what are your personal outlooks into 23? What are you personally investing in, and what are you staying away from?
So I'll answer the second one first. Staying away from commercial at the moment. I still have my thesis is similar to yours. It's long term. It's building wealth long term, building appreciation, letting assets appreciate over the long term, and I just there's certainly going to be a place for commercial buildings, no doubt about it. I just think that we have
Define commercial in your space.
so commercial for me would be
Mm.
offices, you know, yeah, office space, strip malls, stuff like that.
So I
I
have a little slide on that
Okay.
specific topic is that office vacancy rates have just, the trend has been going up like this. So the office vacancy for most of 2022 has been at around 17%, 17.2. And they're forecasting to that to go up, anywhere between 18 and 19% in all of 23.
And yeah, that jives with my intuition, I guess. I mean, I in my job, I go to all these different tech companies, I meet people across the country, across the world, and I see empty offices everywhere. Everywhere. People love remote work. There's a reason for it. There's a reason why it's a very powerful tool. And I see all these vacancies, and I know that there's been a lot of investments by companies to try and entice people to come back to work, come back to the office. And it's hard to compete with remote work if you have the ability to have, an office in your home, or have a comfortable situation in your home or nearby. So I'm a little bit hesitant. Or I should say a little bit. I'm definitely hesitant on the long term viability of that. Now, that that trend could cause a a buying opportunity at some point, because they could go on some crazy fire sale at some point, because people are just tired of sitting on it. And then that means an opportunity. But right now, avoiding that, I always like the 3 bed, 1.5 bath, 2 bath, 1960 build, split level or ranch, and in a really up and coming area. In here in Raleigh, that would be like a North Hills area, or downtown, or some of the some of the surrounding area. But that would be that's one area. I mean, it's very simple, straightforward, but those are easy starter home, people who are just coming out of college, people who starting a young family, maybe don't want to buy, don't have the cash to buy yet. They're usually really good renters, really easy to work with, and you can cash flow positive, but the appreciation is really good too. And then you have it's a 1960 build, so usually what I've found is that those are actually really well built, and so you don't have a ton of issues. It's old, but you don't have a ton of issues that are going to disrupt your cash flow. But then in the long term, you hopefully are in an area of appreciation. Eventually, that house probably gets knocked down for a new construction, so you're sitting on a really good lot that someone's probably going to want to buy, or maybe you want to do something with in the future. So that's certainly an area that I'm looking at. And just in general, I would say I'm sitting on the sidelines right now, and just hopefully setting aside some cash for an opportunity, because I mean, the Fed raised the prime rate 50 basis points in December 15th. So
Mhm.
I think that that'll continue. I don't know if that trend will continue, but I think that there's just a lot of people that are holding right now, probably people that are a little bit worried about not being able to make ends meet, or needing to downsize, or needing to move outside of the Raleigh area because they can't afford, which is sad. But I think that provides buying opportunities, and I don't think we're at our low yet. That's my gut. So I'm
Mhm.
thinking Q2 is probably a pretty good buying time.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of investors in my circles, at least here in South Florida, they offer a very similar sentiment that beginning of the year is relatively slower when it comes to buying opportunities, but also gives a window to look into kind of how markets is overall going to react to Q1, the whatever is also going to happen to rates. Um, Inventory is still insanely low. I think historically there is not enough inventory. Um, you've mentioned single family 1960s build. Question: do you guys have the cast iron issue in the Carolinas? Is that not a thing?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Oh, okay, that's good. I guess they were building homes better than, in South Florida. Most of homes prior to like 1970s or 75 here in South Florida, they've been built with cast iron plumbing, and that's just creates so many problems. All the properties that I bought with, that are in like 60s, 50s, whatever, and it's such a massive, undertaking as well to replace the whole
Big
cast
time.
irons. So that's kind of been a pain
I've
point
I've
for me.
heard of it. It's nothing we've dealt with. Piping is an area that you can have some issues with an older home, but yeah, we I don't think it doesn't sound like it's as prevalent as it is down in South Florida for whatever reason.
Mhm. In terms of what you're looking to acquire, at least in the second half of 23 or the Q2 and so forth, um, one of the things that I recently hosted. His name is George Colony. Almost sounds like George Clooney. He's one of the top, at least in Florida, top real estate brokers. He's probably top 10 in US. He's just the guy's, he's a beast. And one thing that we've talked about is what is he personally investing into in 2023. And what was interesting, he pointed out two things: opportunities to subdivide, where you take a land lot and you actually, opportunities to build that GCs and other construction companies seem to have a lot more bandwidth than what they used to have, at least in 23, with not a lot of construction going on. So you may get better deals by building, and also investing into multifamily properties that provide more than one cash flow opportunity. where you can get one side as short-term rental, whatever the case is, the other, side of the property is um, midterm or longer term rental, that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this townhouse. I want part there. There is space in the back in the back of the townhouse to put an ADU or put
Mm.
some type of accessory dwelling unit, and to rent that out. But I don't know. I don't know the zoning of that yet. I asked my architect to look into that, but that would be kind of a nice opportunity to do that as well. So what are you kind of also researching these days when it comes to investing opportunities? Maybe it's outside of traditional real estate or anything within that space.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You brought up the subdividing. If you can find those opportunities, I think more people are looking for them now. But if you can find those opportunities, that can be really powerful. You got to be really careful with the zoning though. So you got to really know your stuff or have someone that knows their stuff to make sure you're not investing into something that's not going to work. The other thing that I have in mind is that's funny. I always have my grandfather's words in the back of my brain. He said they don't make land anymore, and you see all these urban areas. So, right, I bet if you look at the all 10 of those cities that are on the list that you shared earlier, John,
Mhm.
right, all the surrounding areas are the ones that are really having hyper growth. And they're going from having basically no homes to having hundreds and thousands of homes, and that's happened over the last 5 6 years, especially in those areas. Well, you look at a place like I mean, hell, New York, LA, right, Chicago, more established places. Look
Mhm.
what's happened. I mean, look how far out the suburbs, quote unquote, go. And I'm not saying that Raleigh is going to become LA or Chicago, but it's going to keep expanding. So if you're
Mhm.
thinking long term, right, another thing that I'm thinking about is, where is land today? 20 acres, 15 acres, 100 acres, whatever. Where is that land today that's in the outskirts, that is farmland or is unused woods or whatever, right? Or maybe he just has a couple homes that's got 25 acres. Where can I invest in that today? And maybe I'm negative cash flow for 5 years. Small negative cash flow,
Mhm.
but negative cash flow for 5 years. But then it's a long term bet that some builder, someone is going to want that land and is going to pay a pretty penny, and I'm going to have the benefit of doing it well before anyone wanted to be out there. Or the backup plan or the other plan would be, maybe I don't want to be in the middle of the city. Maybe I want that land.
Mhm.
And maybe that was an investment of, sure, I don't want to live out there today because of whatever chapter I'm in my life, but maybe I want to create a family compound. I want to put 3 homes out there, and a couple friends and a couple family members, and now there's a grocery store 5 minutes down the road instead of 25 minutes down the road because of the growth. Right there, I think that there's a lot of options in that case. And again, I go back to what my granddad always said: it's just they don't make land anymore. So if you can have some, it's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, especially here in South Florida with just overall just state being so narrow and there's only small plant that's available. I think land is such a big scarcity, and I read recently some type of report that just overall farmland, rural, just land overall is in like the top three, whatever asset class to look into investing. I'll have to find that source, but I remember reading something to that extent, which I guess makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if you can find something that you can actually afford. I would be looking at some land here in South Florida. It's just financially does not make any sense. Like I'd go bankrupt.
Yeah, and that could be, I mean, just kind of spitballing here, that could be a place if you're looking to diversify um geographically. It could be that, hey, like, I don't live anywhere near, John, you don't live anywhere near Raleigh, but hey, like, I kind of want to go 35 minutes outside of Raleigh, start looking at land there. You buy it, and it's sure, nothing's going to happen for 5 years, and you're paying property tax on it, but um, it's a small price to pay potentially. It depends on your cash situation, but it's a small price to pay for something that will pay off in the long run.
I
So
like that.
for people out there, right, like, maybe you have friends or family or that can give you a little bit lay of the land of where things are maybe trending. and go 20 minutes beyond that, and maybe that's a good investment at some point.
Yeah, yep. For sure, for sure. Well, Clay, I appreciate your insights today. It's a lot to unpack. It's on top of mind. So a lot of people of everything that's going on, trying to predict, trying to see what's gonna happen in 23. So I enjoyed this conversation, and I'm definitely we'll talk again just to keep the hand on the pulse of what's going on, at least in your number two top 10 markets in in US. And I definitely appreciate you sharing some of your insights today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, John. It was a lot of fun.